Hi, everyone. It's Scott here. I just wanted to mention that there were some tech/audio issues on my end when recording today's episode, but they get a lot better just about a minute in when Mack starts talking. And we have a really great conversation. So I hope you'll go ahead and enjoy today's episode despite some of the tech problems. I apologize for those. But with that, on with today's show. Welcome to Red Pill Nation. I'm Scott Veritas, and today I'm speaking with Mack, also known as Kenziepuff online. Mack is both a libertarian political commentator and a cosplayer. She often speaks out on a variety of issues ranging from economics to gun rights to feminism on her popular Twitter account and her YouTube channel, Mack and Liberty, both of which you can find links to in the description down below, along with her other social media profiles. Today, we'll hear from Mack about her journey as both a social media personality, a libertarian, and a cosplayer, and how those things intersect in her life. Mack, thank you for joining us on Red Pill Nation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to talk to you, and I just kind of want to get started by asking you a little bit of like your story and how you found yourself in this very interesting position of being both sort of this online libertarian commentator who talks about politics, but you're also a cosplayer. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in that position? What's the story there?
Sure, it's very strange. They really don't have a ton to do with each other on the surface level. But I actually got involved with libertarianism towards the end of 2015 when I was in college, and I was president of a chapter for Young Americans for Liberty, which is the organization that started out as Students for Ron Paul, and they just do basic campus activism. And then in 2016, I randomly got into cosplay, anime, all that kind of stuff, and started going to conventions. So at that time, they didn't really intersect that much, but as I got more and more into politics and discovering all the philosophies that went with it and, you know, what it actually means to be right wing and left wing and everything in between, I realized that cosplay certainly has a bent to it, as do a lot of creative hobbies. And so I started speaking more about social issues and how those things intersect. And my Twitter is really the place where both of those things are combined. It's actually the only place I really talk about both. I have a separate political page and a separate cosplay page, which I'm sure we'll get into the reason why for that. But I actually got into them around the same time, which doesn't really have anything to do with each other. I just happened to discover a lot of things about myself, probably because, you know, when you're in college, you just look into different hobbies and things like that. So it's just kind of a natural progression getting into different things.
Yeah, college is definitely a big time for that. My whole kind of political awakening took place largely in college, although it was funny because my journey was sort of like I became very hardcore left in college, and then towards the end of college moved more towards, I guess, the center. I don't really know where I belong anymore. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, in terms of your positioning, what made you kind of end up in the libertarian position? Most people obviously define themselves as like, I'm conservative, I'm liberal, I'm Republican, I'm Democrat. It's interesting that you're in kind of this other category. What kind of made you go libertarian as opposed to more conservative, liberal, traditional left-right?
Yeah, so I think I have a unique experience. Like you said, you came from more of the radical left wing. I grew up being told by both of my parents that there are three things you do not talk about: religion, politics, and family feuds.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually a religion major in college with an anthropology minor. And my brother, my only brother, is becoming a pastor. And we both talk about politics quite a lot, me on social media, him not as much. So my parents are horrified that we've gotten into these things that they told us not to talk about. And we just grew up being told, don't vote for a D or an R when you learn how to vote. But my parents never really, unlike a lot of people, instilled the importance of looking into politics. Neither of them really grew up religious either. It was just something they actually got into. We are Lutheran Christian, but really that started because my parents were looking for a good school for me to go to. So I went to private school my whole life up until college. So they started from there, and now obviously I would consider them more religious, but they were always very laid back and kind of just let us find our own way. Obviously they instilled basic morals in us, as all parents do, but it was never really like a conservative or a liberal parent pushing and really instilling something in their children when it comes to politics. It was just, you know, don't do bad things to other people, really basic, find your own way, which was good in a way. But when I got into college, I realized I was completely apathetic about politics. I didn't vote in 2012, which was the first election I could have voted in. Yeah. And people would ask me opinions about the people running, and I would just say, I don't know. And I was on campus 4 hours away from home, and they were trying to get me to register to vote, as they always do, doing voting drives on college campuses. And I was like, no big deal. It doesn't really affect me. So coming from that, I would probably say, even though I didn't have a political leaning, I would classify myself looking back as more centrist, just not really caring about politics per se at all. But I think a lot of centrist people lean left. So I see my old Facebook posts. I've had Facebook and Twitter forever. And I think I socially leaned left for sure, but I just never cared to look into it. So in college, at the end of 2015, I had a person that I knew actually from middle school that I was still friends with on Facebook for some reason, who is a couple years younger than me, actually. She had been in one of my brother's classes in private school, reach out to me. She went to the same college that I did, and she was trying to start a Young Americans for Liberty chapter. So she got me, somehow roped me into going out to coffee with her and explained to me what it was. I didn't know who Ron Paul was, which to a lot of libertarians is insane. They're like, how did you miss 2008 and 2012? I'm like, well, I was in 8th grade in 2008, so that's how I missed that. But 2012, like I said, I was completely apathetic. So I just graduated high school. I wasn't really interested in that stuff and wasn't completely in college yet. So,
which is normal.
Right, which is totally, I think most, unless, I don't know, I've met some super freaky smart libertarian kids in high school, and I'm just like, okay, you're smarter than me, who are usually homeschooled. But I just really didn't care. And then we went out for coffee, and this girl was pitching this to me. I had no idea she was going to ask me to be president of the chapter of Young Americans for Liberty. But you know, my mom had been telling me, you really need to join some clubs, doing the mom thing, like trying to get me involved, because I was very, very shy. I would have never done something like this back then at all. I would have been terrified. And I just took a chance and I said, sure. But I said, I'm a religion major. Shouldn't I be like economics or poli-sci or something? And she said something to me that's kind of stuck with me, actually. And she said, we don't need only people who study politics and economics and government and stuff like that in the liberty movement. We need people who study all kinds of things to get involved. It's not just people who only care about politics. So that's something I've kind of carried with me. And that's why I talk about cosplay, anime, all this different stuff on my Twitter, because I've always come back to that being said in that conversation is something that I absolutely agree with. And that's how I got into this, because someone took a chance and said, that's okay. You'll learn as you go. We'll teach you all this stuff. We'll give you a bunch of books to read. You can be the president and be a religion major in college. It's fine. And here we are. So it worked out.
Yeah, that point that you were told about people who are involved in politics and engaged in politics, the idea that we need some of those people to not just have politics be their trade and everything that they do and defining them every second of every day. That's something I've really grown into and that I think is very, very important. I was a poli-sci major. I was in the college Democrats. I was just obsessed with politics. And I often wish I had gone back and made myself a little more well-rounded. I feel like I've been able to do that in recent years. But I think that's such an important idea, because the world isn't just politics. I mean, culture is really what comes first. Politics is downstream from culture. I'm sure you've heard that quote. And so I want to ask you, sort of on the note of, you know, your politics and your cosplay, I heard you say something very interesting in another interview I had watched kind of along this note, which is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, you were saying that you think that there's potential to reach people politically through culture, and that maybe cosplay provides an opportunity for that for you. What exactly does that mean, and what would that look like if you were able to do that potentially? I know sometimes you kind of sort of blend like little jokes about gun rights or something with cosplay, and that's very cool. But what exactly does that mean to you, and what does that look like when you're reaching people culturally or politically through culture like cosplay?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that, especially in the past 2 or 3 years, I've really harped on with a lot of people. And that is kind of touching on that we need people from all backgrounds in these political movements, even if you're not libertarian per se. I think conservatives, obviously, I would say, and I think most people would agree, that the default position in a lot of cultural things, movies, anime, even the anime community, anything, really, at least the baseline is left-leaning. And if you're left-leaning, that's great. But that's why I think a lot of libertarians, even centrist and politically apathetic people, once you see that bent, you can't not notice it. And conservatives and libertarians especially struggle a lot with how to connect with people on cultural levels without being in your face about it and just driving people away because you're so staunch in your beliefs and you don't really take the time to talk to anybody or meet people where they're at. So with cosplay, or I've seen people do it with music too, there's an opportunity to not really introduce yourself to someone as, hey, I'm Mackenzie, I'm a cosplaying libertarian. Obviously, people on Twitter know that. But when I go to these conventions and I have a lot of local friends who are absolutely left-leaning, it's been very evident over the past couple months on their Instagram stories and stuff like that, constantly posting about various things that you would
Black
expect.
squares, you know, they ended racism.
All of the black squares.
We have them to thank.
All of the change.org petitions. I take the opportunity to try to connect people through cosplay because I've always found, and actually I don't know if I said this in any interviews in the past, but my Twitter isn't even on my business cards for cosplay because I want people to recognize me as a fellow person in their hobby, realize I'm a human being and that we agree on a lot of things. And then when there's an opportunity to talk about politics, that's when I'll do that. And then the baseline is you're a person in the hobby that likes all the same things I do. We've connected on some level. And that's when I've had people reach out to me and say, oh, you're actually not crazy. We agree on a lot of things and we like all these same, you know, shows and costuming and stuff like that. And I think that there's real potential there. I used to joke that I would eventually do panels at conventions and try to link, you know, political things with, because that's what the left-leaning people do at these conventions. There's many panels on, you know, LGBTQ plus and this series, and that just comes off as cringy to me, not just because of the politics that those people have, but I just don't think that that's an accurate way to reach people. I think you need to just get involved in things, anything. It doesn't have to be cosplay, just whatever your hobby is, get involved, and you are setting yourself up to have these conversations with people where you already have mutual respect for each other. And these days, mutual respect is a little hard to come by, but that's why it's important before people see you as a radical whatever from wherever they're coming from, they see you as a human first. So I think that's why the cultural aspect of things is important and not just shoving politics down people's throats. So
yeah, I think that's such a great point, and it really exemplifies this idea of, you know, politics is downstream from culture and how important it is to, like you said, I think you put it very well, which is be a person first and kind of a political person second, because politics isn't really the basis of legitimate relationships and friendships. I mean, it's great to have your politics largely in common with someone, especially if they're a significant other or something like that. Because a story that I have that's somewhat similar to this is, you know, when I met my girlfriend 2 years ago, who I've been dating for a while, we were, you know, I was pretty red pilled, I suppose. I really should embrace that term if it's the name of the show, but it's, I know the stigma that comes along with that. But, you know, I was red pilled, if you will, and she was, I don't want to say blue pilled, but, you know, she was pretty into the woke stuff, although not terribly. And that's the thing, is you can recognize people who have potential of like, oh, this person is smart, they're capable of independent thought. I would certainly say those things about my lovely girlfriend. But, you know, it's when I met her, there was this process of, I didn't just on the first date say like, hey, have you ever like read Jordan Peterson? Or like, like I didn't just like, you know, like you don't do that. You be friends with someone, you start a relationship with someone. Cosplay is a great opportunity for that. Music, film, comedy, you know, all these other things that are parts of our personality and who we are that are cultural, they're not political. They're really the basis of relationships. So for me and my girlfriend, It was just that we really liked each other. Obviously, we were attracted to each other. We developed an actual relationship. And yeah, a couple months in, I was like, "Hey, have you ever watched Dave Rubin?" You know, like, and we watched Brett Weinstein on Dave Rubin, and she said, "I just didn't, you know, no one ever was able to tell me that the left could go too far." Like, she had not really thought about that before, that there's an extreme version of the left. To her, it was like, okay, the right can get really crazy with the white supremacy stuff. She was far from like what I would call a woke supremacist, like a crazy SJW. She was kind of, even me at my worst, I was never full SJW. And those are people that I look at and I go, oh, this person has potential to be red pilled, if you will. But anyway, I just think that's such a great point that you make about be a person. You know, like, it sucks that everything has to be political. So, you know, try to find ways around that, where if you're going to, because I do sort of encourage people on this show to wake people up, just because I think that I'm kind of like breaking the glass and like hitting the big red button, where it's like people need to know about this stuff. Like, I tell all my friends, like, please, you know, like, follow Anti No on Twitter, like, see what Antifa is doing. Like, just I'm like always trying to get people, but having some tact in doing so and making sure that you're not doing it in a kind of ham-fisted way is really important. But I want to kind of circle back around to this and just ask, you know, so it seems like you do make some attempts to blend politics and cosplay, which is very interesting. But tell me a little bit about just how your personal politics has affected you in terms of your place in the cosplay world, your relationships with other people. Do you have negative interactions? Are there, I mean, I imagine that, you know, like you said, with most things, there's a heavy woke bent to it. How do those two worlds kind of intersect when they do?
Yeah, it's very strange. So I went to my first convention in 2016, and sadly, 2020 was going to be my big year where I just got married last year. 2020 is the year we're going to travel. My husband doesn't cosplay; it's not his thing. He thinks it's kind of weird. He just supports me, but because he enjoys anime and manga and all that kind of stuff and the culture, so he'll just go with me to conventions. And we were going to travel, and I had 5 or 6 conventions I was going to go to in 2020, but thank you, pandemic. So that's unfortunately, I don't have a lot of, or as I should say, I don't have as much convention experience as I want. But as far as just personal relationships with meeting people at conventions, thankfully it hasn't affected that as much. It's more of an online thing, which is great because as I always try to remind people, it's easy to look at Twitter and think that that's an accurate reflection of real life, but really most of people on Twitter aren't even from the US, you know. We have to remember that obviously, unfortunately, a lot of times on Twitter, the craziest people get to the top, and that's what you see. So thankfully, I haven't had anybody like come up to me at a con and say anything to me, or most of my mutuals don't even follow me on Twitter. They only follow my cosplay Facebook page. And I will occasionally post political things on my Instagram story, but I only post my costumes on my Instagram. So there's not a lot of intersection there. And the only intersection that I have is online. And I do, unfortunately, get blocked. I just posted a few months back that a cosplayer that I really admire and really enjoy, I still follow her on Instagram. I'm still subscribed to her YouTube channel, and she travels around to conventions, and she blocked me on Twitter. And it was just one of the few moments I just thought, dang, like the only interaction I ever had with her on Twitter was she asked for reference photos for some cosplay, and I just sent a link. So either I'm on a block list because unfortunately a lot of these cosplayers have block lists where they don't even want to interact with someone that, like, let's say Jordan Peterson, they don't like him, they think he's radical. So you're on a block list, and even though you've never interacted, you might have never even tweeted anything out, you're just blocked. So I have a feeling it was one of those deals, but it still got to me a little bit. And I just thought, you're not even gonna give me a chance, or I'm never antagonistic to these people. I still follow a ton of cosplayers on Twitter, and I'm always seeing their left-leaning posts and change.org petition shares and changing their profile pictures to, you know, black pictures and stuff like that. And that's fine. That's their politics, whatever. I'm there for the costumes. So I just kind of let it slide, and I don't respond, you shouldn't do this, and try to be argumentative, because one, online, just to be quite honest, is not a good form of communication for that kind of discussion anyway. So I prefer stuff like this where I'm actually talking to a human being and we can talk things out, and if we disagree, then you don't hear evil in someone's voice, because people are always reading sassiness into Twitter replies when it might just be an innocent, hey, what do you mean by this? So yeah, it's unfortunate. I've been blocked by quite a few cosplayers, and some that I've never even interacted with or even heard about. And I'll just come across a cosplayer who's retweeted another one and think, I can't even see that. Why am I blocked? So that's how left-leaning the cosplay community is. And luckily, I've had people from Europe and even locally reach out to me and say, and they're obviously left-leaning, but like you said, like yourself and your girlfriend were, they're not what we would call SJW. They're just left-leaning people who maybe don't even realize how radical things have really got. And I have a friend that, unfortunately, with this pandemic, the lion roared its ugly head, and they really started posting, I hope anybody who's spreading false information dies and gets COVID and all this stuff. And I had to eliminate that person, because I'm like, I'm literally concerned for my safety at that point. But most people, when they reach out to me, they say, what's this libertarianism thing? Or they just say, hey, thanks for just representing someone who's not left-leaning in the community, because it is really frustrating. And I know everybody's been through this, no matter what your political leanings are. When you're listening to a song or something and you find out that person is like a crazy this, like conservative or liberal, whichever way, and you're just kind of like, I didn't need to know that. I just want to listen to your music. I had to unfollow some musicians on Twitter, to be quite honest, because I was like, I cannot handle your election 2020 post. I don't want to listen to your music and be thinking in the back of my head, Trump bad, Orange man bad. So I just had to unfollow them.
Yeah, I so feel you on that. I know I believe you're a classic rock enthusiast. I'm kind of like a pop punk guy. I love all the SoCal, like Offspring, Green Day, Rancid, all that stuff. Big fan of all that stuff. And with Green Day, it hurts. It just hurts because I love Green Day. I know they get a lot of shit, by the way. Everyone's going to make fun of me for this. Like, you like Green Day? But I do.
Somebody clearly still likes Green Day. I mean, they're still popular. So
I'm not going to lie. American Idiot is like my favorite album of all time. I'll never grow out of it. Love them. But it just kills me when they're, this was like, I think right around when Trump got elected, Billy Joe he was doing like the MTV Music Video Awards. And I was like, oh, cool. Green Day's here. And he starts doing no Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA. And I'm just like, and I don't even like Trump. Like, to me, it just is just like so ham-fisted. And it's so, I thought that their American Idiot album had such astute, kind of interesting metaphors to the Bush administration, and that Billy Joe actually has an interesting way of viewing politics. Like, I actually kind of liked that combination of, there's another combination of politics and culture. Love American Idiot. Also like 21st Century Breakdown, not quite as much. Anyway, that's music talk. But I feel you on that, is just seeing people again just with no tact and really no knowledge. Like, I start thinking, like, does Billy Joe really know what fascism is? Does he really think that Donald Trump is gonna like start killing the Jews? It's just so ham-fisted and awful. But another one of the things that you mentioned is how social media is not a good place to have political discussion. It's where so much political discussion happens, and we have to live with that. It's like, we can't ignore that. It's important for people who are heterodox voices like ourselves, even though we kind of come from somewhat different places politically. We're both kind of vaguely anti-woke, at least. It's important for us to have a presence on social media, but that's getting pretty difficult, which kind of leads to my next topic, which is big tech censorship, which we might have a little bit of disagreement on. I'm kind of curious. I'm sure that we both agree that it's a big concern, but I've sort of been in this interesting place where, and we'll see kind of where this goes, but for me, I'm sort of like, I guess, centrist liberal. Like, I always try to say to people, like, I have all the positions that Barack Obama had in like 2010. Like, I'm really not, like, people are like, you're alt-right. And I'm like, no, like, if I'm alt-right, so is like Obama, like 10
everyone's alt-right now, so it's fine.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, the interesting thing for me is we get into this kind of big tech is censoring all of the, anti-woke or IDW voices, whatever you want to call them. They're suppressing them, censoring them. It's just censoring the shit out of them. Just it's so bad. And it's Google, Facebook, Twitter, and these are these huge companies. And all of a sudden there's this interesting conversation that started about regulation. And for me personally, it's very funny because a lot of people in the sort of IDW sphere where I kind of exist, the intellectual dark web sphere, are very anti-regulation because they are conservative or libertarian. But then there's people like me or like Sam Harris or like the Weinstein brothers who are pretty liberal and are kind of like, hey, I never really had that much of a problem with regulation to begin with. So we don't really have that. There's kind of this cognitive dissonance going on where, and you may have some of this, and I want to hear your opinion on it in a moment, of just like libertarians and conservatives and all heterodox voices, centrist liberals like myself, we're in this position where we have to start thinking about maybe regulating these giant companies just because they're destroying freedom of speech, at least socially and morally. I mean, people will always say, because I know people in the comments, oh, the government's not going to arrest you, it means you still have free speech. And it's like, no, like I can't speak freely if I'm going to get fired for it, or if I'm going to get, my YouTube channel deleted or whatever. So, free speech is in trouble in large part due to these big tech companies. Someone like me, I'm kind of open to, and I've never really had a problem with, like, hey, sometimes you got to do regulation. I don't think we should over-regulate. I don't think we should regulate where it's not necessary. I think, it's definitely smart to find places to keep regulation to a minimum. But from your perspective as a libertarian, just kind of coming from your viewpoint, how do you feel about, like, I'm assuming that you find this to be a big concern, this attack on free speech. Oh, sorry, there was a little bit of a freeze. So I know that you probably find the attack on free speech to be of a big concern, but how do you feel about potential solutions to that, especially since some of them might involve regulation of these large corporations?
Sure. This is something I see libertarians arguing over constantly, especially because I think a lot of conservatives are completely fine with doing regulation when it comes to social media companies, especially when you can obviously see, and I still cannot stand people that will sit there and tell you there's no bias, because it's blatant. They're not even trying, as they say at this point, to hide. Just, I think, who else? Some other big account just got taken down. A couple big accounts just got taken down within the last week or so. Blue check conservative voices, or even just pretty centrist voices, actually. So that's when it gets concerning, and it's already happening. It's not just, Mr. Jones anymore. And that was very telling to me when he got banned from all social media sources, that even some libertarians were cheering it on, saying, he's a crazy guy anyway. And all I could think was, slippery slope, guys, come on. We all know where this is going. And well, that's exactly where it went. So I think it's always important to stand up for people. And I know there are actually, I can't remember her name, but there was an example of somebody who was just labeled as anti-trans, of course. And she was a feminist that got banned from Twitter. I believe Dave Rubin either did an interview with her or did an interview where they talked about this. So it's not even just conservatives. It's obviously affecting libertarian people, and even anybody that questions the anti-woke, as you've said, is in danger of being banned. And that's really scary, because then all we have left,
Nazi alt-right. If you're not all the way like fucking Antifa left, you're in trouble. Right.
You're on the list, as they say. So I do think the way I approach it is, I think that there's an argument to be said for the publisher argument, where they're not just platforms anymore. They are people that are choosing what can and cannot be published. And a lot of libertarians and some conservatives who won't stand up for themselves will constantly say, well, they're platforms, we can't tell them what to do because that sets a precedent. And I understand that fear, but the bottom line is, we already have so much regulation, and if they're quite clearly publishing and deciding what can and cannot be published, which is definitely happening on Facebook and Twitter, as I don't know if you saw Facebook in front of Congress, but they're just blatantly lying about some things, and it's very obvious if you have a political page. Actually, even my Mack and Liberty Facebook page, which is my political page, I'm constantly getting chances to run political ads or run ads to my page. And I run ads on my cosplay page all the time. I'll just boost a post for a couple bucks. And I cannot do that on my Mack and Liberty page. I've tried. The ad always gets denied. I'm never given a reason. It won't let me, because who knows? And I just post memes on that page. I don't even really, it's not as much like my Twitter. I really just share funny posts, or I'll screen cap my own tweets and post them there. It's not anything that anybody would consider radical. I don't think. But apparently Facebook thinks it is. So I think there's something to be said for treating these companies like publishers rather than platforms. And I also think there's something to be said for a lot of these platforms are already being propped up by government regulation that allows them to have a monopoly on the things that they claim to be doing. So for example, Facebook, obviously there's not really an alternative to Facebook. I mean, I know it's kind of a joke, oh, nobody uses Facebook anymore, but that is a big place to reach people, especially family and family friends. And when you can't do that because you're being limited, because supposedly they're just worried about election interference, which is interesting if you notice the posts that they promote seem to all lean one way, and they're not worried about those people affecting elections for some reason. It just doesn't make sense to me. And my view is there's already regulation, and I know a lot of libertarians really get harped up about purity and, well, we have to have our principles. And actually, my husband and I attended a convention with one of my friends who's libertarian, and he just kept saying, we can't regulate the internet because blah, 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 and give all these reasons. And my husband just looked at him and he said, what good are your principles if no one hears them? What are you? And you can take that to the logical conclusion. It's not even just with social media. If it's to the point where you're so regulated, not just on social media, but you're being so silenced at your university, at anywhere, where you could consider them private, and so technically, yes, they should be allowed to do what they want, then what's the point? You can't speak. So I haven't done a lot of research on this issue. It's a position I've been developing over time, because I get people ask me this all the time, what my position on this is. And really, I tend to lean towards treat them as publishers. We already have monopolies being propped up by government. It's not just social media that has that either. There's all sorts of industries where a specific company is propped up by the government. It gets a subsidy and all this. And you probably wouldn't be saying to those people, oh, it's okay. Who cares if they have a monopoly on that? You know, whatever. People can make the argument with those companies, but for some reason, social media, they just want to say, no, it's fine. It doesn't matter if they're propped up. And it just doesn't make sense to me. And especially with Facebook, there's a lot of evidence that Facebook, I'm like getting Dr. Jones or Mr. Jones here, but there's a lot of evidence Facebook actually, Zuckerberg wasn't the first person to invent it. And there's a lot of government ties to Facebook before they were propped up as a company and before they had to sit in front of Congress and defend themselves to Congress. So you could also make the argument that, well, if government organizations and these, you know, private companies funded by government and as a backdoor are doing this, then why can't we tell them, hey, you're using our tax dollars, you can't do that. So it's a very complicated issue, and I think libertarians and conservatives just get so caught up in, well, if I say this, I don't want to look hypocritical. And I hate the word nuance. I hate when people use it in conversation, but it's more nuanced than just don't regulate or regulate. We have to look into everything that goes into it and how it affects people and how realistically it's actually affecting culture, because at this point it quite clearly is affecting culture, and social media is, whether we like it or not, like you said earlier, we talk politics on it, it's a huge part of most people's daily lives, and it affects how they get news, how they view information, everything like that. So I think it's more important than just arguing with each other over, well, should we regulate or not? We just need to sit down and think about what the implications of all that put together are, instead of just saying, well, you're a statist because you think that Twitter should be regulated. It's just, that is not a productive conversation to have with someone. And I say this as an anarcho-capitalist, I don't even want the state to exist. But if someone's a minarchist and they think the state should be limited to, you know, police, courts, all that, I'll have a talk with them and we can collaborate and come to an agreement on something instead of just shouting at each other. So I think that's how we need to approach the social media thing.
Yes, I do say that something needs to happen. Like this conversation needs to kind of level up. Like it can't just be like, well, I don't like regulation. So, you know, like I said, there has to be an openness to the fact that like, hey, this is a break glass moment.
Yeah.
We are at a moment where the only way that what I call the resistance, it's funny because resistance has anti-Trump connotations, but what I call the resistance is people who are against woke supremacy. People like you and me who may view certain things very differently, but at least we know, hey, there's this ideology that is just bulldozing our society. And the only way that it's going to be defeated is if the heterodox voices get their message out. And I had so much hope in like 2017, which was kind of my red pill year, when like Dave Rubin was growing a lot, Jordan Peterson was exploding. And, you know, a lot of these voices were starting to gain real traction. And then all of a sudden, YouTube starts, you know, there was the Project Veritas video about YouTube just suppressing the crap out of Tim Pool and Dave Rubin, and that they're probably suppressing all of us. And it's interesting because I go, well, it's interesting that despite that, you know, Jordan Peterson has 3 million subscribers, you know, because some people point to that as evidence. And I'm like, I don't think they'll say that like, oh, well, Jordan Peterson's popularity and Dave Rubin's popularity, doesn't that prove that there isn't suppression? And I'm like, no, I think it's in spite of it. I think that they're just such salient voices that they're getting popular anyway. It's like Jordan Peterson is too great to keep down. Like he's just too much.
You can't keep him down.
No, yeah, exactly. So
well, and to me, it's like, it's so funny to me when people point to, and I'm totally fine with Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin. I think they've done a lot of great work, especially for people that might be centrist or coming from the left, bringing them to at least consider other ideas, which is, I always support that. But it's so funny, people point at Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson to me and go, well, they have so many followers and they're not being suppressed. Even people like Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin, who I would consider very moderate, even centrist people, are being suppressed. That should tell you something. It shouldn't go, oh, well, their channel's not taken down and they're just being suppressed a little bit, so who cares? It should be, holy crap. Even Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson are being suppressed, and I don't consider anything either of those people say radical at all. So if they're being suppressed, I just don't know how in someone's head it doesn't click that maybe you're next, because they're not radical at all. And people that think they're radical, I'm like, man, you should not watch some of the videos that I've seen on YouTube, because there are way more radical people than that. So it's just so funny to me.
Oh, it's crazy. I always say, when you've lost Noam Chomsky, like when Brett Weinstein is alt-right, like it's your Overton window is so fucked. Like
so messed up.
When Noam Chomsky is not left enough for you, you have problems. And that's where that's Jack Dorsey thinks that. Like Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, Susan Wojcicki, these people go to bed at night thinking Dave Rubin is an extremist. He needs to be stopped. That's hilarious to me. I agree. People shit on Dave Rubin. The level of hate he gets. And look, I like Dave a lot because he was a big part of my red pill journey, if you will. But I know he's made mistakes. I've seen Dave do things where I'm like, you know, like, all right. Like, you know, he's done things where I've been like, that's a miss. You know, hit lots of hits, some misses. But overall, the level of vitriol that is directed towards him in particular, I'm like, what the hell? Like, Sam Cedar has to have the most pathetic fan base on the internet. Oh. I wanted to do a video called like Sam Cedar, the most pathetic fan base on the internet, just because the way that they go after Dave is just absurd. Like, why Dave? It's just so interesting to me. I
don't know. And to me now, I mean, I'm still subscribed to Dave's channel, and I read 12 Rules for Life and all that, Jordan Peterson's book, and all that sort of thing.
I have a poster behind me that's 12 Rules for Life poster.
But to me now, I respect what those people have done, but in the grand scheme of things, most people who are radical one way or the other, unless you're so focused on the woke thing, would view those people as kind of milquetoast. Not even really one way or the other. They're just saying basic things. And I think that's why 12 Rules for Life hit home with so many people, because it was basic things that a lot of people just aren't taught anymore, that aren't really radical at all. And you just sit down and you read it, you say, and from my perspective, I'm like, I kind of already knew all this, but I definitely get why people love it. And same with Dave Rubin. He interviews all these kinds of different people, and I say, oh, well, I've already been exposed to all this, but I can see why people like the interview style. So for anybody to just so disgustingly attack either of them, it's like, wow, like, don't go to my Twitter. Like,
Yeah.
whoops, okay, all right, I guess I better calm down, because if that's what they're worried about, I mean, I've been called a fascist like so many times within the last couple of
Hmm.
weeks, though. So what is that? Like, these words don't even mean anything anymore. That's the other thing. Like, we were joking about everybody's all right now. Like, they called Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan. Joe
Yeah,
Rogan,
Bernie bro
clearly,
Joe Rogan.
clearly left-leaning Joe Rogan, who just interviews people for a podcast, is called alt right. It's just like they have this secret agenda, and they're secretly, because that's what they try to say. Well, they're secretly all right. Or my least favorite argument ever, well, they're giving those people a platform, so that's why they're bad. It's like, okay, well, now you're telling people they can't even speak to other people. And I've even had people try to do that with me. They'll say, well, this person's following you, or you're following this person. I'm like, and what about it? That doesn't mean I agree with everything they say.
Right.
I mean, do I have to? Well, and now I understand why these people are in bubbles, because they think, oh, if I'm following that person, people are going to think I agree with them. So I guess the block lists make sense then, because if you even, there was an anime artist who redraws anime characters who liked a Candace Owens tweet. She just liked a tweet. And Candace does tweet some hot takes.
Sure.
I'll give them
Yeah.
that. But I don't remember what it was, but it was not a hot take at all. It was just like basic, some basic conservative tweet. And the amount of vitriol and hatred that they got, and keep in mind, they're just an artist. They had never talked about politics before, but because of the going, you can look at somebody's likes on Twitter, and the feature now, well, they'll put something in your feed if someone you follow has liked it. So people were seeing that she'd liked this Candace Owens tweet, and I talked about this on a stream once, like a couple months ago. Just, it was disgusting. And I was like, over liking a tweet? She didn't even tweet out, I love Candace Owens, she's great. She just liked a tweet. I don't even think she was following Candace Owens on Twitter. She just happened to see the tweet and not think it was a bad take and like it, and woo, like that side of Twitter just exploded. And I thought it was so stupid, to be completely honest. I just couldn't believe that. It's like there's a new thing every day where I just think, whoa, okay, these people are serious. They're taking it really, really far. So
Oh, every time you think it's reached, like, we are at peak woke, like every time you think you're there is more. It's like climbing this mountain, and every time you think you're at the summit, you're like, oh shit, you look up and
there's another
mile
thing.
to go. And it's I always say that's such a great example of how you should never try to, like, honestly, just don't associate with the crazy wokeness. Like, don't try to satisfy them. Don't try to have any relationship with that world, because you will unless you are completely submissive to them and believe everything they tell you. If you have the slightest inkling of original thought, if you like one of Candace Owens's tweets that as you're saying wasn't even one of her hottest takes, if you will, like, that's too much. Again, you're fucking Noam Chomsky. You can't be associated with these people. And my favorite example is J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling cracks me up, because this is a woman who was like, yeah, by the way, the Sorting Hat eats ass. Like, she was
Right.
going back and retroactively making, that's a meme.
Characters, she was making characters things that, like, there was
not woke enough.
Right. It didn't satisfy them. And it never will. That's the thing. And unfortunately, the artist that I'm talking about that liked the Candace Owens tweet put out an apology. And guess how that went over? Not well. It didn't matter. And it was, honestly, it really seemed like a heartfelt apology. And she said something like, I know you guys follow me for art. I'll make sure I do this on my personal account that no one knows about it from now on. And I kind of understood that, because sometimes I know people, left-leaning people do follow me, believe it or not, on Twitter for my cosplay. And that's why I have a Instagram and a separate cosplay Facebook page, because like we talked about earlier, I get when you're following an artist or a creative person and you don't really care about their politics, you just want to look at their art. Understandable. And that's the kind of apology she gave. Very level-headed, not nasty, not attacking people and being like, what's wrong with me liking this? Nothing like that. Just a sincere, heartfelt apology. And it didn't matter. And I knew it wouldn't matter. But people, that when they're first exposed to the mob, it's like they don't know what to do about it. And they just think apologizing will help. But 9 times out of 10, it just makes it worse. And it definitely made it worse. Then people, of course, are like, this apology isn't good enough. You shouldn't, whoa, you shouldn't have liked it. Then you wouldn't have had to apologize. Everything that you could think of. And it was so ridiculous. And that's why I'm constantly saying, just don't apologize to the mob, because it doesn't do anything. If you're gonna say something, you have to stand behind it. Otherwise, they're gonna come get you anyway. And that's my view. And that's why if I think it, I tweet it. I try to say words that won't get me banned, but if I think it, it's out there. I put it out there because people are gonna attack you anyway.
And isn't that so freeing? Isn't that the best when you
Yes.
just go like, fuck them? When you just stop trying so hard to like, oh, well, I don't want to really have them come out. Once you're like, well, they're going to do it anyway. Like, all right. Like once you pass that point of no return, it is so liberating. It is a really great feeling. I had my moment probably about 2 years ago where, you know, it was like a year into kind of my red pill journey. And I was just like, I'm not even going to try anymore. Like I used to kind of couch my language in like, cause I'm not a huge fan of Trump. So I can kind of connect with people on that. If they're woke, I'm like, yeah, I don't like Trump either. So I used to constantly like, oh yeah, well, fuck Trump. Like I used to kind of play that up so that people would view me as credible or whatever. Then eventually I was just like, I'm only going to really talk about Trump if I really want to. Frankly, the Trump discourse bores me just cause it's everywhere all the time, all day long.
Who cares at this point? That's where I'm at. Because like, obviously I'm libertarian. I'm not a big fan of the man either on most things. There's some things I think he's done that are good, but I can't even say that. And one of the things I also told people to stop saying, and I've stopped doing because I used to do it all the time, is I don't agree with X person, but stop prefacing things with that. If someone's brain is so tiny that they can't understand that just because you agree with one thing doesn't mean you agree with everything someone said, then they're not worth your time anyway, and they're not the people you were going to reach anyway, because that's the thing. I've been called various things on Twitter for the things that I tweet, and not just leftist people. Libertarians have problems with things I tweet. Conservatives have problems with things I tweet, because that's just kind of what happens when you're a libertarian. You just piss off everyone. But if I stopped and self-censored, and as I call it, optics cucking, if I did that to make everyone happy, all the people that I've made mad, I wouldn't be able to say anything. I would just tweet my cosplay pictures and that's it, because some people even get angry at the cosplay pictures. So
you're holding a gun in this cosplay. Yeah.
And someone the other day said, that's not a real gun. And I'm like, yeah, it's a prop. Okay? Yes, you're right. It is a fake gun. For now, I'm planning on doing shoots with real guns, but yeah, that's a fake one. I didn't try to say it was a real one. It's just people will argue about anything. They'll attack you over anything. So like we just said, you might as well just say what you actually think and what you want to talk about, because it doesn't matter anyway.
Oh yeah, I have a theory about how if you view the world through the sort of critical social justice lens, you can problematize anything. And so I have a game with my friends called Problematize This. And so we'll be like, problematize golden retrievers, and then I'll be like, well, you know, golden retrievers are a sign of upper middle class, living. And so that shows that it's a classist, and we just do that because you can do it with anything. But I want to make sure we get to something. I know you were excited to talk about. It's luckily it's a topic that doesn't offend anyone. It shouldn't really be a big deal. It's kind of like a nice, easy conversation for us to have. We're just going to talk about feminism, which should go over great with everyone. I don't think there should be any problems. It's a nice, easy topic for us to just touch on. But one of the things, I think the thing that really originally got me interested, I think the thing that got me to originally to follow you on Twitter and discover your work was actually some stuff that you had said about feminism. And my read is that you're not a huge fan of it. And I basically just want to sort of toss it over to you. I mean, feminism has become a very dominant factor in our society, in our culture. What are kind of your feelings towards feminism and its impact on our culture?
Well, I think it's been absolutely disastrous. Which, as you said, I'm not a big fan. That's probably an understatement. I wouldn't class myself. I mean, I think most people call me an anti-feminist, but I've always been a big believer that you shouldn't describe yourself as anti anything. Like, have positions that you're for and things that you're for, because I think it gets really dangerous when you start calling yourself anti this, anti that, and you can really get sucked into the negativity very, very quickly. And that happened when a few years ago, any feminist that, I've been called every name in the book by those people, they don't really come after me anymore. I don't really know what it is. I don't know if I've gotten to the point where my tweets don't get to their circles as much or something like that, or maybe just because I stopped arguing with them, because there really isn't a point with arguing with them. They just call you various names until you have internalized misogyny, whatever that means, or that you hate women.
Or that you're not a real woman, that you're like somehow not.
Well, I mean, I have been called the man various times on Twitter, so it's like, okay, am I a woman who hates women, or am I a man? Like, pick one. They seem very, I guess maybe they're the same things to feminists, I'm not really sure. But to get to the point, my biggest problem with feminism is the focus on egalitarianism, and I think that's ultimately the big divider between the left and the right is, do you value egalitarianism, equality, those sorts of things, or do you see the hierarchies naturally that occur in nature and within humanity and understand that that's impossible? And not only is it impossible, but it's a very destructive thing to hold up as the end all be all thing to strive for, because it's just not possible. So, and I think Jordan Peterson has touched on that quite a bit, honestly, which is something that I really liked that he did. But that's where my biggest problem comes in with it. And then, of course, the other side of it that I have an issue with is, I have a husband, I have a brother. It's just my brother and I in our family. I have a father, I have a little nephew now. And I see how men in general are treated. Mm-hmm. And it just disgusts me, to be honest. And I know that there are people out there that do talk about this sort of thing and jump on the train, so to speak, and just talk about that thing because it's popular. And I realize a lot of the anti-feminist movement can get very cheesy, and I fell into that too, I think, when I first got into it. Mm-hmm. But then I read Christina Hoff Sommers' The War Against Boys. And as a woman growing up, I really just thought we were all treated the same. And that could just be a product of my upbringing. It's just my brother and I. So I'm sure our parents did their best to treat us, both as the same. Because my parents, I think I would describe both of them as pretty centrist. So they might lean left a little culturally, but they don't talk about politics. They're not like into the feminism or anti-feminism or anything. So I never realized really any struggles that men were going through. And then, I mean, my brother and I are very close. We're only 15 months apart in age. I'm actually adopted. So my parents adopted me, and then my mom went to her yearly appointment, and the doctor said, "Oh, you're pregnant." And my mom's like, "I thought I couldn't get pregnant." And the doctor's like, "Well." So my brother and I have always been very close, but we never really talked about politics when we were kids because, like you kind of talked about earlier, you just don't really do that when you're a teenager. Most people, maybe now, but I mean, when I was growing up, it's just something I think most people just didn't care to talk about. And so talking to my brother now, who I would consider probably very left-leaning, centrist at the best, probably left-leaning, I don't want to say it the worst, but that's the side he would look to, I think. But even he is very open-minded to, he told me the other day I'd vote Republican if they represented me or something. So he's very moderate. But even he was in talking about, we went to private school. So I know a lot of people think the boy thing is only a big deal in public school, but I don't think it is. I think it's a societal issue. And I think in a lot of ways, boys are treated like they're defective girls. And I have a big issue with that. And it's something I didn't really realize until I read Christina Hoff Sommers' book. And after I read that, I said, it was kind of a red pill moment for me when it comes to the gender thing between men and women. And I started talking to the men in my life, the male friends that my husband about it. And my husband was just kind of like, yeah, that's just how it is for boys. And I just got really sad because I didn't realize that. And then I felt like, is something wrong with me that I didn't realize all these boys were struggling and getting treated differently? And then you think, well, I mean, yeah, most teachers are women. So you always hear feminists say, oh, we need strong female role models and all this stuff. But I mean, most boys grow up being taught, aside from their dads, if they have one, by majority women in schools. Then you get to college and it's a little bit more of a mix, obviously, with professors, but still the things that you're taught are catered mostly the way that schools are set up, are catered mostly towards the way girls learn, which isn't a bad thing, and that's why girls usually do better in school. And then you have the ADD thing and all of that. And I just didn't realize that that was even a thing. It just never entered my mind. And I was never a feminist, certainly, but I never looked into feminism, but I also never really looked into the other side of things. It's not like men's rights, I wouldn't say, but just the struggles that men were going through. And then you get into the normie stuff, I would say, that I think is getting more attention, like male suicide rates, all that kind of stuff that men's rights activists talk about. And you just think, how could you look at this legitimately as a feminist? And I know they always say we're not attacking men, but they are. So you can say, and I've even said this with, I see this in conservative and libertarian women too. You might not think that the things that you're saying are feminist, and you might even classify yourself as an anti-feminist. And I've had to do some thinking about some ways that I would frame things too. You might just be trying to give men advice. You might be just trying to say, hey, women want to be treated better. But the way that it comes off and the way that it's implemented, it's not working, and it's becoming disgusting in a way to attack people. And now it's got to the point where if a woman speaks out about it and tries to say, hey, we don't need to be attacking guys, like all of us could do better, like that line, which I hate. My pet peeve is when I talk about women or men and somebody inevitably is like, well, what about the other, sex? And I'm like, that's not what we're talking about right now. Can we just focus on one thing? But it's, once you get into it, I just don't like, I don't know, I can't even put my finger on it. It's just never struck me as, it just doesn't seem like they're coming from a good place. And I hate to say that, because I think a lot of the times online, it's really easy to look at someone and think, oh, that person seems really disingenuous. But when you start reading feminist literature, like the Feminist Mystique and even Gloria Steinem, and looking into feminist history, just from the very beginning, the way that things were approached were women need improvements. And it's like, okay, yeah, agreed. Obviously, there are some ways that women were treated that weren't acceptable. But it got to the point where it just made it all about women. And I just tweeted out, Trump, why? He wants to build a statue in DC commemorated to, because it's the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, and he wants to sign the bill to build the statue dedicated to fighters for, the suffragettes and all that. And that's a dude that's supposedly conservative and Republican that wants to do that. And I would think that would make people scratch their heads and say, wow, if even somebody that's been classified by the left as sexist, misogynist, this big shot, from the tapes of things that he said, wants to do that, would that not make you think that maybe things just aren't as big as an issue as you've made them out to be? And that maybe we need to start looking at other things and how society is affected? And it just doesn't make any sense to me why we can't talk about other things. And I mean, it really gets into the, as Dave calls them, the oppression Olympics. And people just want to be the victims, and especially women, I think, fall into this. And that rubs me the wrong way too, because I don't know, people would probably just tell me I'm privileged, but I never dealt with any of that. And I mean, I wouldn't call my upbringing privileged, very lower middle class. Went through some things, but I just never understood why women feel that they don't have any role models, they don't have anyone to look up to, men need to do better. They never seem to say anything about themselves. And it almost makes me wish, and I think in a lot of ways, that's why Jordan Peterson actually struck with a lot of guys.
Yeah.
Because he was kind of that person to come in. And it was so funny. I never thought about this because my dad's always been present in my life. I was talking to someone on the phone, actually, who I was going to do another podcast with. And we were talking about Jordan Peterson, and I had just read 12 Rules for Life and was like in that phase. I was like, this dude is awesome, And I still think he's fine. But the guy was like, I think that book's stupid. And I went, why? Like, it's helped so many people. And he just said, those are things my dad, like, that's what my dad taught me. And then it got me thinking, like, okay, well, not everybody has a father figure or even a male figure present to look up to. And I think that's why Jordan Peterson sadly struck home with a lot of people, because even if you had a father figure, you might have not felt it represented as a male in society because of some of the things women said to you or how you were treated or stuff like that. And that's why Jordan Peterson struck. And I think that's why it makes me so mad when people attack him, because it's attacking what he represents too, whether they realize it or not. I personally think they know exactly what they're doing, but that's just me being a little conspiratorial.
Right. And
but I don't understand what is the issue, even if you're a big feminist, with men having male spaces, even if you want women to have women's spaces. But it doesn't seem like that's what they want. It seems like they want women-only spaces and blended spaces where women are allowed. No male spaces allowed. And we've even seen that with fraternities and sororities and that type of thing, which is crazy to me, but it's just, it doesn't make sense.
and what does it say, kind of like you were saying, about our society in terms of where women are kind of placed in society socially and where men are, that the second men got someone who gave them encouragement, who gave them a message about positive masculinity, who went against the grain of men need to do better, men are awful, they're, you know, inherently, you know, sexually amoral and all these awful things. The idea of believe all women, which is just, let's just have a society. I mean, that's intrinsic to feminism now, which is, let's just believe women's words over men. The second that somebody came along to push back against some of that negativity and also say, hey, being a man can be a great thing. The second there was a figure with any cultural relevance who gave a positive message to men, he was immediately slandered with the most ridiculous attacks. I mean, the New York Times called him the custodian of the patriarchy. That is like one of my favorite turns of phrase ever, because it shows the level of just insane. Who thinks that way? That's something a supervillain says. To like the hero. It's like, oh, the custodian of the patriarchy has come to my lair. Like, that's what it sounds like. Like Jordan Peterson has his sword and shield. He's going to fight the evil witch. And she's like, I see the custodian of the patriarchy is around. It's so fucking bad shit. Because he's such a nice man. Like, that's the thing. Yeah, the thing with Peterson is I'm like, just by if you actually listened to him, you might not agree with everything that he says. I think he was kind of weak on the Kavanaugh situation, for instance. You might agree with me on that. That was a moment where I was kind of like, he doesn't really seem to get that. But if you listen to him and you actually have, just for 2 minutes, if you listen to him, you go like, oh, this seems like a really nice, caring man who wants to help people. And if you go so far as to call him the custodian of the patriarchy, this evil alt-right, I remember they said he wants enforced monogamy, which must mean he wants to hand out nubile women to useless men. And it's like, all he meant was, you know, monogamy is kind of a good thing, by the way. Like, maybe we don't just throw that to the wayside.
I got into many arguments with left-leaning people on what enforced monogamy meant, and it was just painful. I'm like, just the word enforced just makes you angry? Are you like actually listening to what the man is saying? Because if you listen to what he's saying, he doesn't mean state mandated girlfriends at all. It's just, it was so absurd. It was so silly.
Yeah, it's insane. I want to ask you, I mean, how do you think feminism came to become such a dominant force in our society so quickly? Because it's really been like the last 10 years that I feel like it's just exploded. Like, why do you think so many, I see you say things on Twitter from time to time where I'm like, I've like never heard another woman say it. Like you said, you say things like being a woman on the internet is easy. It's such a simple thing. And everyone knows it's true.
Yeah.
Like it's it's like everyone knows there are these automatic like supports and followers you're going to get just from being a woman on the internet. Yeah. Everyone knows that's true. Everyone knows that. But if you say it, it's like, how could you acknowledge that women have any kind of advantage whatsoever? No, you must be a victim. I mean, the fact that that's such a rare thing, like just how did feminism become so quickly the overwhelming majority in terms of how I'd say most women under the age of 30, kind of like I was mentioning before when I was in the dating world, it's just like, why is it so dominant? How did it get so dominant? Like, why do you think so many women have become feminists just over the course of the past like 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think that, well, and it's funny you bring up the women, being a woman on the internet is easy, because I that's one of the things that I feel like is so obvious. And like you said, everyone knows, but if you say it, people get really mad. Even I've had some conservative and libertarian women get mad at me for saying, yeah, I have a lot of followers because I'm a woman that says things that some other women don't say. And not even necessarily that, just for the cosplay thing. And they get mad. And I'm like, okay, well, go make an anonymous account, make your profile picture a random woman on the internet, and tweet some things, and you will get thousands of followers. That's how it works. I was just telling my male followers in a YouTube live stream, I go, do it for a week and see how many more followers you get. Just like do an experiment, just like change your bold name to something innocuous on Twitter, and just make your profile picture, even a cartoon, like an anime girl will get you more followers. Cause it's just, I don't know if it's something inherent in men that they just see, it's just nice to look at. I don't know what it is, but we all know
That's
that.
part of it. I can confirm.
But that's just something that you don't say. And I think it's a really good example of something that's so obvious, like the patriarchy thing. Do we really have a patriarchy when we have diversity quotas for women? We have all these things. Most college students are women. If you say anything against women online, even as a woman, can confirm, you get attacked, even if you didn't mean it to be negative. If it's perceived as an attack, you get attacked. And it's not just by leftists, as we would call them either. It's so ingrained, and I dealt with this too, like recognizing my own biases and thinking, wait, I used to think maybe not something that radical, and I would have never called myself a feminist, but I had that idea of, like, I used to have this t-shirt, and now it's so cringy to me. I had a t-shirt that said, probably from H&M or something, one of those throwaway stores where it's just like fast fashion, raise girls and boys the same. What? No. First of all, what does that even mean? Second of all, no, that's a terrible idea. Boys and girls are not the same. And that's fine. And you think that'd be evident, but it's so pervasive in our culture that I was just like walking around wearing that t-shirt, like, yeah, nothing's wrong with that. Like, we should treat everyone equal. And that's where the egalitarianism thing comes into play. And I do think partially, I mean, I could talk about how I think it's insidious and get a little conspiratorial, but I really do believe that part of it is that it just sounds nice if you don't think about it. If you actually start taking it to its logical conclusion, it becomes a little, oh, well, how far are we going to take this? But if you just say, I think boys and girls should be raised the same, or I think everyone should be equal, it sounds really nice. But when you actually take that to its logical conclusion, you realize, one, that's not possible. With the raising kids thing, you realize, well, there are inherent differences. Whew, somebody's going to get mad about that. And they do get mad about that, which just blows my mind. But can't even talk about biology now and people get angry. But I think it's because in a lot of ways, it's not just a cultural thing. That's very important, like we talked about earlier. But this is such a meme, but it's really state enforced. It's when it comes down to it. And as a libertarian, that's one of the biggest problems I have with it, is that's just the default position that you're supposed to have as a human being. All people are equal. You know, girls and boys are the same. You know, the girls have been oppressed historically. We still need to do more. What more? Can't ever tell you, but that we just know that we need to do more to help women. And there's just so many government policies helping that sort of thing. And this isn't just with women, it's with other groups too. But then you just look at the evidence and you're like, well, we're in many ways, the most prosperous we've ever been. Women have the most choices that we've ever had. But despite all that, and despite the rise of feminism and it being pervasive in universities, and if you're not even a male feminist, or if you refuse to call yourself a feminist as a woman, you're attacked. You're still told that there's a problem, and you're still told that we need to do more, but you're never told what. And it's just like a never-ending feedback loop that it scares me where it's going. And like I just said, we can't even talk about biological differences anymore. And there's all sorts of infighting even on the left about that sort of thing. And that's where it gets into, I don't think it was just feminism. I think feminism is part of it, but it goes back to the egalitarianism thing that's really scary. And despite all that, when you look at statistics, for men and women, happiness is generally trending down. There's a study from, I think they ran a study from 1970 to 2006 that was published in 2009, I believe. And they just interviewed people on general happiness. So you could say, well, that varies from person to person for sure, what determines happiness. But it's generally trending down for men and women, but even more so for women. And it's not just like a white woman thing, it's across the board. Like they did Hispanic, Black, white, all races that they could have a sample size for, and it's trending down. So it just seems like the more we cater and the more we push this oppression thing and give people more and more opportunities, not that those opportunities are bad, but I think we seriously need to sit back and think, well, why is happiness trending down then? Why are more women than ever before depressed, on anxiety medications? I don't think I know a lot of people, even men, who aren't at some point or have had anxiety or depression. A lot of times in college, and I dealt with that myself, anxiety in college. And that, that could be, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life and all sorts of things. But I think we just need to sit back and actually evaluate whether it's a good idea or not. And not that people don't deserve freedom, obviously, but I think in striving to make everyone equal, it's made people unhappy. And it makes sense because you can't possibly make everyone equal. It's just not possible. It sounds really great, but it's not possible. And along the way, they tear all these other things down, like masculinity is just toxic now. That's a thing, that's a phrase that people use constantly, toxic masculinity. What is that? To me, it just seems like masculinity in general, what they describe as toxic, which if that's the case, we're in trouble. Even the APA put out, or the American Psychological Association, they put out a new guidelines for boys. I don't know if you saw that, which were terrifying to me because it was the epitome of boys are defective girls. And I just thought, how could anyone read this? Like, what if a parent's reading this? They're like, yep, seems good to me. And they're raising boys and they're like, oh, they're depressed. Oh, we don't know why. I don't know. Maybe because you raised them like a girl. And they're not a girl. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
and they would never release guidelines for they could never. I mean, it's so blatant how it just works one way and not the other. We could do a whole show about feminism.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have another. I'm thinking of at one point doing like a feminism roundtable and having a few
really
people
cool
on as I kind of build a network of guests. And you seem like you'd be a great person for that.
Yeah, I would love that.
We're coming up on our time. I have one more question for you. It's a question I plan on asking all of my guests on this show, which is, what do people do? What are concrete actions that people should be taking to fight against, whether it's feminism, this whole BLM cult thing, which doesn't really mean Black Lives Matter, by the way. I know people are going to be like, you don't think Black Lives Matter? It's like, no, not talking about that, talking about Marxism. But
we could probably do a whole show on that too.
Yes, there's a lot to talk about here. I am thinking of increasing the length of the show at one point, but for now, we're sticking close to an hour, and I just want to ask this last question of, what are the concrete actions that you think people should be taking, whether it's as groups or just individually in their workplaces, in their personal lives? What should people do to fight back against woke supremacy?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, because I think too often, and I just did a thread about this on my Twitter. People get so caught up in thinking, well, I'm just one person, and then they look at other people in various movements that they're in, and I think that person is doing so much more than me. Like, all I do is dress up in costumes. What am I supposed to do? I just send tweets. Just humans are built to specialize in things. So if you have something that you're good at, it doesn't matter what it is. You can be a gym instructor, getting people fit. That's great. Like, no matter, everybody can align with that. Well, some people get mad at it now. But you get what I'm saying. No matter what you do, you can be a trainer, you can be a cosplayer, an artist, musician, whatever. Build a network of people around you. Like even you said, when your girlfriend and you started dating, she was fairly moderate and she didn't really identify with those woke people. That's great. I'm not saying you got to date people to, get them to understand, but just make friends with people. Like even just making friends. I have a friend who would definitely classify herself as a feminist, which people are going to find hilarious watching this back. But even she has come to the point where she says, you know what, modern feminism doesn't represent me. And that's just because of conversations that we've had. Not me pushing and constantly harping on her feminism is bad, but her realizing through conversations with someone who isn't super into that sort of thing, that maybe there's something up here. So I think the best thing people can do is just get involved with friends and people actually in their communities. I'm not saying you have to go to your job and if someone says something you don't agree with, attack them. That would be silly. But just even having conversations with people, even podcasts like this, even if you don't have a podcast, just talk to people. Like we talked about right at the beginning, circling back. You're a person, sit down with people as a human to human interaction, talk to them, and if they bring up something you disagree with, you don't have to go into it and be full on, well, you're a statist, you're a commie, anything like that. Just say, well, have you ever thought about it this way? Or say, I do this a lot, you should read this book or this free PDF that I found and give back to me, and just we can talk about what you think about it. Or send them an article that maybe they haven't read before on a subject that you agree with, that you might think, they might be a little iffy on. Do that, and then have discussions with people. That's how you're going to change people's minds, I think. Social media is a great way to reach a large amount of people. Podcasts are great, all that's great, but I think where we're going to make actual changes culturally is by having friends, creating families where you can have normal conversations again and not view people as just political beings, but as human beings. So I think that's the best place to start. And I think it's probably the most overlooked thing, especially during an election year when things are so ramped up. But I think that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely excellent advice. Mack, thank you so much for being with us. Do you have anything you want to plug, any social media? I know you're Kenziepuff on Twitter. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, I'm underscore Kenziepuff on Twitter. If you want to hear politics, the best place to do that is Mack and Liberty, MACK, on Facebook and YouTube. And if you want to check out the cosplay, it's Kenziepuff space cosplay over on Facebook. That's just my costuming page. So.
Awesome. All right. Well, everybody go check out Mack's social media and keep up with her. I want to thank everyone for listening and remind them, if you're listening on iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. You can follow me at Scott_Veritas on Twitter. I'm Scott Veritas. This is Red Pill Nation. Thank you for listening. See you next time.